I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast.
Ted Bundy is one of America's most vile serial killers and sexual predators. Ted was active in Washington, Utah, Oregon, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. He has been connected to 36 victims, but investigators believe the number is probably closer to 50 or 100 people. This is the fourth and final part on Ted Bundy. If you haven't already, pump the brakes. Go listen to parts 1 through 3 before tackling this one. For our last part on Ted, I thought it would be fun to start with a strange Bundy fact.
Ooh, let's go.
So Ted had a sock fetish. Ted says, "One of my fondest dreams is to have all the underwear and socks I could ever conceivably have. It's one of my fantasies."
Ew.
His quote continues to say, "To be able to wear new socks every day. And I must admit, I have had 3 or 4 dozen socks, all purchased on stolen credit cards." Ted was almost obsessive about his feet. During phone interviews, he would have his feet propped on the bars and stare at them. He also told investigators his feet were probably the most attractive feet they would have ever seen. Ted was so proud when the list of his socks were read out in court until they got to his white socks with blue and green stripes on the toe. Those were odor eater socks, and that was just a little too personal for Ted.
All I gotta say is if he was living in this time, he would have been on that app where they sell pictures of feet. I'm not positive what it's called. He'd be on it.
Definitely.
To look at feet and possibly making a living taking pictures of his own feet.
I'm not sure if anybody ever photographed his feet. I'm curious, are they actually the nicest feet as he claims they are?
You know what? There was a photo in one of the documentaries.
Of his feet?
I don't remember if he had shoes on or not. I feel like he did. But it was a photo from the angle under the table. So you saw his, have you seen it? It's like a black and white photo.
Yes. There's the Conversations with a Killer. The cover of the book is literally of his foot.
Ooh.
I guess up. But I thought it was actually targeting the ankle bracelet.
Oh.
That he was chained. But ew, maybe now we were supposed to be looking at his feet. I'm really not sure.
That's weird. The whole thing is weird.
It's so strange. It's just the cherry on top of the weird case of Ted Bundy.
So we left off part 3 with Ted being arrested for the Chi Omega and Kimberly Leach attacks. Continuing on here, Ted was his own lead defense attorney in Florida. He fought to have Judge Rudd removed due to prejudice. It was approved, and in January 1979, Ted received Judge Edward Cowart. This judge was known to follow the law to the T. He would scold Ted, but then follow it by telling Ted that he looked nice today. Much to Ted's displeasure, the hearings and trial would be recorded by a television camera.
Before the scheduled June trial, Karen Ann Boone and Louise Bundy begged Ted to change his plea. He had the opportunity to bargain for a lesser charge than first-degree murder charges, which would remove the death sentence as a possibility. Ted motioned to make a plea deal, agreeing to plead guilty to second-degree murder of Kimberly Leach, Lisa Levy, and Margaret Bowman. Then at the last second, Ted tore up the papers and told Judge Cowart that he would like to withdraw the motion. In June, the judge approved 2 psychiatric evaluations, and the trial venue was moved to Miami. The evaluations would find that Ted was capable of standing trial.
Jury selection began on June 25th. Even with the venue change, it was hard to find jurors that hadn't heard of Ted Bundy. The jury ended up mostly with blue-collar workers like a bookkeeper, maid, retired elementary school principal, and a trucker. Carol Ann quit her job and moved to Florida with her teenage son, Jamie. Carol Ann would stay in cheap hotels and work 18 hours a day as a legal assistant for Ted's defense. Ann Rule also flew in and was considered press for the trial. After the first day of pretrial court, Ann introduced herself, but Carol Ann just said that she had heard of Ann and walked away. Ann would never speak with Carol Ann again.
Ann Rule was a criminal journalist. Like Liz, she had that moment when she knew that Ted was guilty. The pantyhose mask that had been found in Utah and the photos of the murdered women did it for her. She knew that the mask matched the one found in Florida. She would stay in Florida for the verdict, but she already felt that Ted was the murderer.
Like deja vu, Ted requested a typewriter, more exercise, and access to the law library. He also requested unlimited visits with Carol Ann, since she was working with his lawyers out west. Unlike Colorado, the judge denied all these requests. Ted would be his own defense attorney, the defendant, and a witness during this trial.
With the pre-trial review and jury selection completed, Judge Cowart was ready to start the actual trial on Saturday, July 7th, 1979. Ted and his defense team argued for more time. It was 1 p.m. They were working on 5 hours of sleep, and they weren't ready for opening arguments. Like so much of this trial, Ted would get upset, but our Judge Cowart was not fazed. Ted would continue to argue to start on the following Monday.
Ted said, "My attorneys are not ready."
Judge Cowart responded, "We will begin, Mr. Bundy."
Then Ted said, "Then you'll start without me, Your Honor."
And Judge Cowart responded, "As you like." Nicely handled, Judge.
Absolutely.
Ted wouldn't, of course, let anyone else lead his defense, so they started on Saturday afternoon, with Ted sitting at the defense table.
It was highly debated on Ted acting as his own defense attorney. He was cross-examining witnesses in depth, which comes across as a sick desire for Ted to relive and relish the pain he had caused. The charges were read as burglary into the Chi Omega house, first-degree murder of Lisa Levy, first-degree murder of Margaret Bowman, attempted first-degree murder of Kathy Kleiner, attempted first-degree murder of Karen Chandler, attempted first-degree murder and burglary of Cheryl Thomas.
Ted would be tried separately for Kimberly Leach. Karen, Kathy, and Cheryl would take the stand. Other Chi Omega women took the stand as well. The media seemed to think it was more of just a story, and the victims were often forgotten. Men in the area were much less forgiving. In Ann Rule's book, she details a conversation where one man says they should nail Ted's balls to the wall and leave him there to die. On the opposite side of the spectrum were the groupies. These women would show up to court dressed like the victims, with long dark hair parted down the middle and hoop earrings. They would slip notes to the media and investigators asking for these notes to be passed to Ted.
This is revolting.
Yeah, it really is. Some of them even dyed their hair the correct shade of brunette. Ted received mail with marriage proposals and nude pictures. Some of the letters were from girls as young as 16. The women just didn't believe that Ted would hurt anyone. A psychologist would be interviewed. He thought it was a combination of fear, intrigue, and sexual attraction. As podcasters, I can definitely understand the intrigue portion. The groupies here are on the next level. We could probably do a whole corrupted clip just on the fascination these women had with Ted Bundy.
Yeah, I think we definitely could. I mean, I get it. Ted was a good-looking dude.
Sometimes.
Sometimes, that's true.
Sometimes he's got like a 5 head and like this really huge widow's peak. It just depends on what stage of his life he's at. Because sometimes he's a really small guy, and then later he's a really, I don't want to say like really big guy, but he's much bigger than the guy he was when he was fitting through that 12 by 12 inch hole in the ceiling.
And he changes his appearance too. So it fluctuates.
He has a beard. He has no beard. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He has a unibrow.
Always.
But with the beard, I feel like it would match it. So, and no, I'm definitely with the men. Nail his balls to a wall and leave him there. Honestly, if I was a reporter covering his trial, I would describe in great detail all the torment Ted put each and every single one of these women and children through, and I wouldn't leave a thing out for them. Court would be delayed 2 days as Ted and another of his defense team came down with a virus. On July 16th, the manager of the Oaks would testify. The manager remembered that Ted didn't have the money for rent. Ted told him that he would call his mother in Wisconsin and she would send some money down for the rent. But then the next day, Ted's room was cleaned out. Because Kimberly Leach's trial would be separate, the jury was not advised that Ted left Tallahassee. On July 17th, Ted wasn't in court when the jury arrived at 9 a.m. At 1 a.m., Ted had thrown an orange to break a light bulb in his cell. Ted was immediately removed from his cell and placed in another cell. They found shards of the broken bulb hidden at the back of his cell, but were unsure if it was a suicide or escape attempt. Then Ted had jammed the lock to his cell with toilet paper, saying that he would be at court when he felt like it. Judge Cowart found Ted in contempt of court for delaying the trial. By 9:30 a.m., Ted would arrive, but he was in poor state. Ted went off on a tirade about his treatment and pointed his finger at the judge. Ted said, "There comes a time when the only thing I can do is passively resist. I have potential. Now, I've only used the part of potential which is nonviolent. There comes a time when I have to say, whoa."
Judge Cowart answered Ted, "Whoa, if you say whoa, I'm going to use spurs."
Ted continued whining about his treatment, but then started pointing at the judge.
Judge Cowart shut that down real quick, saying, "Don't shake your finger at me, young man. Don't shake your finger."
Ted then turned and pointed his finger at the defense table.
This judge is phenomenal. He's also a Southern guy that says "bless your heart" in that condescending way to Ted all the time.
Yeah, I got mixed signals with him. I was like, you either like Ted or you don't like him. Like, where are you going with this, Judge?
Yeah, he's got a very dry sense of humor, and he'd just be like, "Bless your heart, sit down, be quiet."
That's the professionalism, maybe, in him, so I can see that.
Nita Neary, the Chi Omega sister who saw Ted leaving the house, took the stand. She pointed to Ted as the man she had seen leaving the house that January morning. A dental odontologist, this is a dentist that testifies in legal proceedings about bite marks. Teeth alignments, chips, and size are almost like a fingerprint. This dental odontologist, they took the stand. The bite mark on Lisa's skin hadn't been preserved correctly, and it had deteriorated. But there were photos that were used in court. There were enlarged photos of Ted's teeth and the bite mark. When the photos were placed over each other, the jury could see that Ted's teeth matched the bite marks left on Lisa Levy's butt cheek. The dental odontologist described the attack. Ted had bitten once, turned his head, then let go and bit a second time. This was the first forensic evidence linking Ted to any murder or disappearance all the way back to 1974.
Ted would dispute the bite mark forensic evidence, though, stating that his front tooth had been chipped while in jail in March 1978 after the Chi Omega attack. Carol Ann even took the stand, stating that she had visited Ted in jail in late 1977, and his tooth was not chipped at that time. Ted was trying to say that the dental odontologist had altered the photo of his teeth to make them match the bite mark. Ted continued trying to delay the trial and requested a new defense team. The judge wouldn't hear of it, saying that Ted had 5 advisors, which was already more than enough.
That's the problem, though. Ted was running the defense and let the rest of his team just be advisors, even though they had law degrees and he had struggled through law school and never finished. The trial would be concluded at 2:57 p.m. on July 23rd, when the jury retired to make their decision on Ted's fate. It was a quick determination, and by 9:20 p.m., they had reached a verdict. Ted was found guilty on all charges. At the sentencing hearing, Louise Bundy took the stand to plead for her son's life. The jury only deliberated for an hour and 40 minutes, then returned with the death penalty. Judge Cowart sentenced Ted to death, saying, "The court finds that both of these killings were indeed heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and that they were extremely wicked, shockingly evil, vile, and the product of a design to inflict a high degree of pain and utter indifference to human life. It is ordered that you be put to death by a current of electricity, that current be passed through your body until you are dead. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity that I've experienced in this courtroom. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer, and I'd have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself.
In January 1980, Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, both journalists, interviewed Ted over several months. Ted agreed to the interviews with the intentions of looking like a victim of police false accusations. They went back and forth when eventually it was suggested for Ted to discuss the events in third person from a psychologist's point of view. He took the tape recorder in his hands and for some cases would provide information in the third person.
Ted considered the suspect despicable. He walked through the highs and lows and experiences of the suspect always in third person.
In later interviews, Ted would describe how pornography ruined his life. Like a gateway drug, porn led to seeking out more and more explicit and graphic content. He eventually spiraled into acting out his fantasies.
He also blamed the women's rights movement. For the first time, women were hitchhiking and having sex with strangers. It was the perfect time for a serial killer like Ted Bundy. The murder trial for Kimberly Leach began on January 7, 1980 in Orlando. Ted would have a different judge, an almost entirely new defense team. With Ted already being sentenced to death, the vibe around this trial was very different. Ted had also gained quite a bit of weight since the last trial, now weighing around 190 pounds, which was a big change from the 1977 escape when he had weighed 140 pounds. At one point, Ted completely lost his cool and attempted to stalk out of the courtroom. He was blocked by the bailiff and officers, but Ted's rage was caught on camera, and it wasn't pretty.
On February 6, Carol Ann applied for a marriage license. It became clear that Ted and Carol Ann wanted to be married, but they would not be allowed to get married in jail. Carol Ann admitted that she expected Ted to be convicted, but believing him innocent, she chose to marry him anyways. Ted didn't have the fight in him with this trial, but was almost accepting that he would be found guilty. The jury deliberated for 7.5 hours, but came back with that guilty verdict.
At sentencing, Louise Bundy didn't take the stand this time. On the second anniversary of Kimberly's disappearance, Carol Ann would take the stand to plead for Ted's life. Before she pleaded for Ted's life, though, she wanted to get married. A notary sat in the courtroom with the marriage license in hand. Ted asked Carol if she wanted to marry him, and she responded yes. Ted then said, "I do want to marry you," which was the wrong wording, so they had to redo it. This time Ted said, "Will you marry me?" Carol Ann responded, "Yes." And then Ted responded by saying, "Then I do hereby marry you." Carol Ann was already wearing a ring on her left hand with a T etched into it. That was it. They were married. The judge and almost everyone in the courtroom were not impressed, and how absolutely disrespectful to Kim Leach and her family as well.
I thought that was just a skit, but they had a notary in the courtroom and it was all legit.
Yep.
I'm sure this gave Ted a sense of control.
Yep. And it got Carol Ann exactly what she wanted. She wanted to marry him.
Yeah. Carol Ann was sneaking drugs and alcohol to Ted. On multiple occasions during the trial, he had slurred speech. They also found bags of pills with Ted. Carol Ann was giving him Valium and vodka to get through the trial, and by the afternoon, he would be trashed. This didn't help his trial at all. The jury retired for 45 minutes, then returned with another death sentence for Ted on February 9th. Just days later, on February 12th, the judge also sentenced Ted to death by the electric chair.
Ann Rule's book, The Stranger Beside Me, was published in 1980. There are two versions of the book available. One is very abridged. I've read both books a couple of times now. The unabridged book is almost 600 pages and well worth the time. During the fall of 1980 tour of her book, Ann would be told that she was too hard on Ted, that she went too easy on Ted, and even had to be escorted out of a Denver radio show due to a death threat. Ted and Ann hadn't spoken since before his Miami trial, and after he heard about the published book, Ted would mail Ann a letter. His letter accused Ann of taking advantage of their friendship and told her to send $2,500 to Carol Ann as soon as possible. Ann did not mail any of her money to Ted. He had been aware that she was researching the Ted attacks before she realized that the Ted was her friend.
Excuse me, Theodore. The smashing of skulls, the strangling of the necks, the shoving of the inanimate objects into women were too harsh for you to come to terms with? Let's rehash this out and make it clear. The measure of disgusting shit he did to his victims will never amount to the harsh criticism he deserves.
Very true.
Carol Ann had married Ted, and now she wanted a baby. The prisoners put in $5 until they reached $50 or $60. Then lots were drawn, and the winner got the money to bribe the guards. The guard would look the other way when the prisoner and his visitor went to the bathroom or behind the water cooler for sex. In February 1981, Ted and Carol Ann conceived a daughter behind the water cooler.
The prison said that Ted didn't get conjugal visits, but obviously he did.
Yeah, and their daughter Rosa would be born the following October.
There are photos of Ted holding his daughter after taking so many daughters from their father. This should have never, ever been allowed.
Agreed.
Liz released her own memoir in 1981 titled The Phantom Prince, My Life with Ted Bundy. She used the pen name Liz Kendall, but it took journalists no time to discover her real name. They also found Molly's name, and she was only 15 years old at the time. The book was out of print until 2020, per Liz's request. In 2019, The Phantom Prince was used as a reference for the Netflix movie Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. Liz felt it was time to update and expand the book, and it was put back into print with her thoughts decades later and Molly's memories. Liz and Molly would also tour the set of Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. They saw the scene where Zac Efron and Lily Collins meet at the bar in 1969. Angela and I both read The Phantom Prince, and I would highly recommend it. The audiobook version starts with Liz narrating it, then the book ends with Liz and Molly both narrating. I might still not understand Liz's actions, but it's clear that she loved Ted and just got mixed up in his shenanigans.
Yes, I agree with you. It seemed like Liz really loved Ted, and in some way, I feel that Ted did truly love Liz.
Mm-hmm.
I go back and forth with this too, but I also feel like that's the way Ted and Liz felt about each other. At some points, you feel like they are on top of the world and they're so in love, and then other times they need space and separate.
Yep.
While at Florida State Prison on death row, Ted mailed a letter to law enforcement offering to help with what he called the Riverman investigation. In 1982, Washington women were disappearing and their bodies were found along the Green River. In 1986, King County had 40 known murder cases associated with the Green River killer. Ted told investigators to stake out the recent burial sites because it was likely the killer would return to perform sexual acts. The investigators knew that Ted was also admitting to what he had done, but they did stake out the Green River killer's sites, using the information that Ted provided with his knowledge of Washington State and how the killer might think. Gary Ridgway would be arrested in 2001, and Ted's help was almost spot on with Gary's actions.
Ted was far from admitting defeat. In the summer of 1984, he would be caught in another prison escape. His cell was searched, and hacksaw blades were found. One of the bars of his cell had been sawed off at the top and bottom, then glued back together with a soap mixture. It was never determined how those saw blades got into him. This isn't jail. This is an escape attempt from Florida State Prison death row. The entire prison was fenced with guards and towers.
Ted would sit on death row for 2 more years. He continued to fight the murder convictions. In 1985, Ted requested a new trial in Kim Leach's murder, but the court again ruled that the death sentence was justified. Then on February 5, 1986, Florida Governor Bob Graham signed Ted's death warrant. The date for Ted's execution was March 4th.
A letter was received from the governor's office to a Seattle Times reporter requesting Florida residents reduce their electrical usage starting at 6:57 a.m. on March 4th. The public was asked to turn off air conditioner units, TVs, and dryers. This would save an additional 5 megawatts of electricity for Old Sparky, the electric chair for Ted's 7 a.m. execution. This letter turned out to just be a very dark prank. Ted had filed an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, but the day he would be heard by the court was March 7th, 3 days after his execution. After some back and forth, the Supreme Court would agree to stay Ted's execution until April 11th. The day after Ted's death warrant was signed, Anne mailed a letter to Ted. Ted would send a return letter to Anne on March 5th. Ted griped at Anne for her actions, but then ended the letter by saying that he holds no animosity towards her because she was a good person.
Carol Ann would bring Rosa to the prison every Saturday until Rosa was over 5 years old. During that time, Carol would smuggle weed and Valium to Ted vaginally into the prison. When Ted's death warrant was signed in February, he was no longer allowed contact visits with Carol Ann and Rosa. It was incredibly hard on Rosa. She didn't understand the change in routine and only being able to see Ted through the glass.
Ted's execution would continue to be extended. In July, he would come within 15 minutes of execution when he received another stay.
Talk about on the edge of your seat there.
Yeah, that's horrible. Anne and Ted would write letters back and forth through the fall of 1986. At some point, Ted never wrote Anne back. She was writing another crime book, and Ted was apparently writing to people from all over the United States. Ted would lose Carol Ann and Rosa in August 1986. Carol Ann's mother had been in a car accident, and they moved to Seattle to help her mother. Their marriage was also struggling, but Ted wouldn't share that information. Carol Ann would describe Ted.
He was obsessive, demanding, moody, always needing. While on death row, Ted wrote a letter to his cousin. The letter said that he hasn't killed anyone, but then he continued to write,
I have no guilt, remorse, or regret over anything I've done. What is done is done.
In 1987, Ted would be tested for his mental competency to stand trial originally for Kimberly Leach's trial. Information from Ted's early childhood was released with the mental evaluations. After many evaluations and more delayed executions, Ted would be confirmed as having been competent in the 1980 trial.
Carol Ann and Rosa visited Ted in May and November 1987. The Thanksgiving 1987 trip would be the last time Carol Ann would see Ted. She did not visit him in 1988 at all. Throughout 87 and 88, Ted continued to fight the court system. Every time an appeal was denied, he found something else to pick as an appeal, but time was running out. The Supreme Court denied the last appeal in December 1988.
On January 17, 1989, Ted's fourth and final death warrant would be signed. The execution was scheduled for January 24th. Carol Ann might not have seen Ted in 1988, but she always believed that he was innocent. When it appeared he would be executed, Ted called Carol Ann to ask for advice on January 19th. Ted called it Bones for Time. Carol Ann wanted to know how he could call it Bones for Time if he was innocent. Ted would indirectly confess to Carol Ann. Then he had the audacity to ask to speak with their 7-year-old daughter. Carol Ann would not allow Ted to speak with Rosa, and there would be no goodbye.
On January 20th, Ted confessed to his stepson Jamie as well. Jamie was now an adult and a minister. Like Carol Ann, Jamie had always believed in Ted's innocence. He asked Ted to protect his mom and not confess, but Ted ignored Jamie's request. Ted said he might be willing to discuss the missing and murdered cases if he received another delay in his execution. The request was denied, but Ted went ahead with the confessions. The first thing Ted said was that there were 5 bodies on Taylor Mountain, not 4. The remains of Donna Manson were also on the mountain. Ted also admitted that Georgianne Hawkins' remains were at the same site as Denise Noslin and Janice Ott. He admitted to 3 more murders in Washington, but did not provide details to the detectives.
Ted requested a 3-year stay on his execution, saying that he would detail his crimes in full, but on January 22nd, the court denied the request again. Ted just kept confessing, and investigators were listening. He confessed to an Idaho detective about the abduction and murder of 13-year-old Lynette Culver. He also described another Idaho woman that he had picked up while she was hitchhiking on Labor Day weekend, 1974. Her body was thrown in the river. There was no missing person case filed in Idaho at the time for this woman, so it's possible she had been hitchhiking from somewhere out of state.
For the first time, Ted discussed the necrophilia and the Polaroid photos. No one knows when Ted's attack started. He mentioned to one investigator that he attempted to kidnap a woman in 1969. Then to another investigator, he mentioned a murder in 1973. Some of the victims' bodies had been posed. When Ted Bundy was asked why he took Polaroid photos of the victims, he said,
"When you work hard to do something right, you don't want to forget it."
Ted would confess to the murders of Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Melanie Cooley, and Shelley Robertson in Colorado, Melissa Smith, Laura Aim, Nancy Wilcox, and Debbie Kent from Utah, Kathy Parks in Oregon, Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and Kimberly Leach in Florida.
On the day before Ted would be executed, Karen Campbell's father was interviewed by the Free Press. Robert Campbell said,
"You never really forgive someone for something like that. You just try to put it behind you. The thing I'd like to have back, I can't have."
Right through the heart. Damn.
Yep.
Louise Bundy was devastated to learn that Ted had actually confessed to the murders. Louise said that she had several daughters of her own, and Ted wasn't raised that way. She did not fly to Florida, but spoke with Ted over the phone. She told him that he would always be her precious son. Ted was calm on the morning of January 24th, 1989. Ted's stepson, Jamie, would be one of the 3 people allowed to hug him before the execution. Louise did not come to Florida, neither did Ann, Liz, or Carol Ann. Ted would be alone. His head, wrists, and right leg were shaved in preparation for the electric chair. Ted was dressed in a blue dress shirt and navy blue pants with the right leg rolled up. Ted declined his last meal of steak and eggs. His execution would be witnessed by 42 people.
There were 300 to 500 people outside of Florida State Prison celebrating. There were parents and children outside the prison, and it was like a big party. People came from all over the United States. They were chanting things like "Burn, Bundy, burn," and banged frying pans together. There was so much noise that Ted could hear it inside the prison. Signs were held up saying "Florida wants revenge," and "Tuesday is Friday." Shirts were sold saying "Burn, Bundy, burn."
I found this so disturbing. To cheer or wish for one's death makes you like the murderer, in my opinion. The family of Susan Rancourt, the victim Ted wouldn't ever talk about, her sister and her mom stated they weren't celebratory of Ted's execution at all. Her mom would just go on to say, "It is never a good thing when there's death, just another mother losing their child." To have that strength of compassion towards Ted, of all people, that murdered her daughter is just a whole nother level.
Yep, it really is. At exactly 7 a.m., Ted walked to the death chamber between 2 large guards. A skull cap with a hood was lowered over his head. A black hooded executioner pulled a lever. Based on the 42 witness statements, it was either a man with long eyelashes or a woman was the hooded executioner that pulled the lever. Ted's right leg was smoking from the electrical current. By 7:16 a.m., Theodore Robert Bundy would be declared dead. He was 42 years old.
I have a specific imagination at this point of time with Ted's execution. Once that lever is being pulled down, I see all the women that he murdered pulling it down. It doesn't bring my heart joy, but it brings it almost to peace in a way.
Some closure.
Yeah, closure. Closure is the best word for it. Yeah, there's nothing more to say about it, but it's just, it gave me goosebumps thinking about all the women pulling the lever down and just executing him one by one.
Yep. It's a sad situation because it's just a waste of life the whole way around.
For sure. Yeah. The warden announced Ted's death and the crowd outside cheered. Ted's autopsy would be performed the same day. No drugs were found in his system. There was a burn ring around Ted's head and an 8-inch burn on his leg from where the current flowed into his body. They did find an enlarged heart, but physically there was nothing different than any other autopsy. Ted's DNA and blood were kept and uploaded to the FBI's national database. This might help connect a cold case to him. Ted's wishes were to be cremated and his remains to be spread over the Cascade Mountains, saying that was where he had spent some of the best times of his life.
I was so outraged. This is where the women's remains were left on Taylor Mountain. I hope that his remains were not scattered there. Pick another mountain range in the United States.
Right? Or better yet, no mountain at all. Pour him into a drain of a large, busy city. No trees, no mountains, no freedom for Ted Bundy. There's no way his wishes should have been carried out like this.
I agree, and his mom seems like a pretty classy lady, so I feel like she probably just kept his remains. In 2016, another victim would come forward. Rhonda Stapley survived an attack on October 11, 1974. Living in Utah, she had dental surgery and was waiting on the bus when Ted pulled up and offered her a ride. Rhonda knew that hitchhiking was wrong, but this didn't seem like hitchhiking because the man went to college with her. This felt more like accepting a ride from a fellow student. Immediately after she was in the car, Rhonda noticed that the interior car door handle was missing. Ted told Rhonda that he had an errand to run around the zoo, and then just drove past the zoo to an isolated wooded area. Terrifyingly, Ted leaned forward to tell Rhonda that he was going to kill her, then started to strangle her. She would be attacked for 3 hours. Ted would strangle her until she was unconscious, then revive her to rape her and strangle her again. Ted thought Rhonda was dead or unconscious when she woke the final time. He was standing over by his car. Rhonda used the opportunity to run, but her pants were around her ankles and she tripped and fell into a fast-moving stream. Rhonda said this stream probably saved her life because the water swept her away. Rhonda walked 10 miles from the woods back to campus, cleaned up, and never told anyone about the attack. Rhonda was Mormon, and having been raped left her with an additional guilt, so she kept quiet all those years. She would see Ted's face in the news the following year on charges for kidnapping Carol DeRanch. I have no doubt that Rhonda escaped a murder attempt from Ted. He had already killed multiple women, and just a month later would attack Carol.
There are many other possible victims of Ted Bundy. It's possible that Ted attacked women in California and Vermont as well. The next couple people are assumed to have been attacked by Ted, but he does not admit to their disappearance. In August 1961, 9-year-old Anne Marie Burr disappeared from her home. Her home was only 10 blocks from where 15-year-old Ted lived. Anne Marie woke up in the night to let her parents know that her younger sister was sick. Then her parents thought she went back to bed. The next morning, she would be discovered missing. The front windows in the home didn't latch because the antenna went through it, and they were hanging open on the morning of Anne Marie's disappearance. Tacoma police have never found Anne Marie, but they suspected that her body may have been buried below New Street paving that was going on at that time. Anne's mother wrote to Ted while he was on death row, begging him for answers. Ted declined his involvement in Anne's disappearance, saying he was too young and her house was too far away, both of which were not true.
On June 23, 1966, Lisa Wick and Lonnie Trumbull would be found assaulted in their beds. The women were flight attendants that lived together in a basement apartment in Seattle. There was a third roommate that wasn't home that evening, but the next morning she found Lonnie and Lisa. Lonnie died from blows to her head. Doctors speculate that Lisa only survived because the curlers in her hair had absorbed some of the impact. Lisa didn't remember the attack. She went to sleep and woke from a coma several days later in the hospital. Neither woman was sexually assaulted. Ted would not admit to the attack when asked about it in 1989. This would have also been a year before Ted's 1974 attack on Karen Sparks. The case was reopened and reviewed in 2018. With no new updates, it remains unsolved.
Debbie Smith was 17 years old when she disappeared in February 1976 from Utah. There isn't much known to the public about Debbie's disappearance or why Ted is suspected as her murderer. Debbie's body would be found at the Salt Lake International Airport on April 1, 1976. From Oregon, Rita Jolly disappeared in June 1973, and Vicki Haller disappeared in August 1973. Both women may have been kidnapped by Ted.
On July 4, 1975, Nancy Baird would disappear from East Layton, Utah. Nancy had married young and had a son, but her marriage didn't work out. On July 4th, 23-year-old Nancy had dropped her 4-year-old son off with her parents and went to work at the gas station. A police officer would be at the gas station between 5:10 and 5:15, and everything seemed fine. 2 children would see Nancy around 5:15, but then she would suddenly disappear. Her purse with $160 cash, medication, and her car keys would be left at the gas station. East Layton is about 30 miles away from Salt Lake City, so we know Ted was in the general area at the time. His girlfriend, Leslie Knudsen, said she spent the weekend with her family and Ted in Utah. Ted also denied knowing Nancy's name and didn't recognize her photo in 1989.
Ann Rule would continue to write 30 crime novels and 3 movies.
In addition to The Stranger Beside Me, I would highly recommend Green River Running Red. This book is on Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. If you have never read an Ann Rule book, I haven't found one yet that I don't like. I'm recommending them all. They're all so good.
Ann died in 2015 at 83 years old. She had been suffering from multiple health issues. Ann's daughter, Leslie Rule, continues writing crime and paranormal books. Liz has been sober for many years. After Ted, she got married and got divorced, but mostly stayed out of the public's eye. Liz's daughter, Molly, was just 3 years old when Ted came into her life. The last chapter of The Phantom Prince is written by Molly. Molly loved Ted, as a child loves any father figure, but things were not great for her either. As Molly got older, Ted would play mean tricks on her, like tripping her or hitting her in the face with a ball, then say it had been an accident even though she felt like it had been on purpose.
When Molly was 7, she was alone with Ted in her apartment. They were playing tag, and Ted hid under a blanket, completely naked. Ted told her that he would only be invisible if he didn't have any clothes on. She was so young, but she does remember his eyes going tiny, and one eye appeared to be looking in a different direction than the other. When they were done wrestling their way to home base, Molly remembers hearing almost like a voice telling her to act normal and cheerful and tell Ted that she loved him. In 1970, Ted took pictures of Molly in the bathtub as a joke.
Out of all the witnesses that I've seen, like Ted's eyes and everything, this is the one that creeps me out the most.
For sure.
When she says like his one eye appears to be pointing in a different direction, I'd be skeeved the F out.
Yeah, like all of a sudden he goes cross-eyed?
Yeah.
It's weird.
Ted would also carry Molly around with his hand between her legs, and on several occasions, his hand slipped inside of her underwear. This went on for a couple of years until Liz saw him do it one day and yelled at him. Just yelled. That's it.
Yeah.
Ted thankfully never did it again. Like Liz, Molly struggled with the weight of having Ted in their lives. She would become addicted to alcohol and drugs before finally following in Liz's footsteps to sobriety.
Maybe I'm just naive, but I missed just about every clue throughout the book that Molly might have been abused as well. She spends several weeks at a time in Utah with her grandparents, and as a parent, I found myself wondering throughout the book, where's Molly? But I missed all of the signs of her abuse, even knowing that other very young girls were attacked. I felt like Liz and Molly should be safe, but they weren't.
No, I'm with you there. It was almost like she was always with someone else, like Liz's parents or a sitter. And to be fair, it might have been better off that way for Molly. Not so much abuse, because she wasn't around Ted as often.
Sure.
John and Louise Bundy would endure hate for years. They had to change their phone number multiple times. Louise died in 2013. She was 88 years old. Louise attended Tacoma's First United Methodist Church from 1951 until the 2000s, when her health prevented her from attending. That's almost 60 years at the same church.
Ted had 3 half-siblings, 1 brother and 2 sisters. His sisters are alive today but refuse to talk about Ted. Ted had a much younger brother named Richard who he was closer with. Ted would take Rich camping, and they spent most of Rich's summer vacations together when Ted lived in Seattle. Richard also visited Ted in Utah, but on one occasion, their visit was cut short because Ted told Rich that he would need to leave. Years later, after his conviction, Richard would piece together that Ted had probably felt that malignant sign of him building up and needed him to leave. It's possible that Ted's siblings may have changed their names.
Ted would push the people he truly loved away. Like the protective side of him was trying to keep them safe from the corrupted side of him.
Yep. Ted's actions wrecked hundreds of families. Rich loved him. Louise loved him. He touched so many lives, and not for the good. It's just so devastating. Linda Healy's family found it hard to talk about Linda because it caused too much pain.
Carol Ann and Rosa changed their names and went into hiding after Ted's execution. We know that Carol Ann and Rosa continued living in Seattle for a while. Jamie stayed in Florida and got married in 1991. Jamie would eventually move back to Washington with his wife, and they adopted 2 children. In the 1990s, Carol Ann surfaced to share some of Ted's letters with a psychologist, but then she was never heard from again. Carol Ann passed away at a Seattle nursing home in 2018. She was 70 years old. Rosa would be in her 40s today. She apparently has no intentions of disclosing that Ted Bundy was her father and has never came forward.
There are probably hundreds or thousands of books, TV shows, and movies out there on Bundy. It's a cultural phenomenon. We already discussed the books that we read, but there are some amazing shows as well. Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile is a Netflix movie released in 2019. The movie stars Lily Collins as Liz and Zac Efron as Ted. Haley Joel Osment also appears as Liz's boyfriend.
The acting and production into this movie was great. They did an amazing job, especially Zac Efron and Lily Collins. Zac seemingly surprised me. I already knew that boy could act, but man, this was something not usually in his wheelhouse of acting, and he slam dunked it.
And I think they did a really good job of making Zac Efron look very similar to Ted Bundy. Like if you see just, regular pictures of Zac Efron, you're like, no, that, he doesn't look that close to Bundy. They did a really good job.
Yeah.
The casting definitely had me fangirling. Zac Efron and Haley Joel Osment. Secondhand Lions was a hit in my house as a kid. I think that my mom might have actually liked that movie more than I did, though.
Yep, that movie was a good one. Sixth Sense, too, with Haley. Talented kid.
Yep. This was like our first obsession with Ted Bundy back in 2019, when Extremely Wicked, the movie, came out.
Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, was also released in 2019 based on the book of the same name. This one was a very good documentary. It has a lot of good footage of Ted, the trial, the execution. It was overall just very well done. There was a moment in this series that stuck out to me in particular. I believe it was in episode 2 where they said once Ted really got going on explaining his killings, his eyes turned black. That just gave me chills of uncomfortness all over my body.
It's just all about his eyes.
Yeah. Something in his eye. I don't know. It's the devil, man.
Mm-hmm. The evil. Yep. Very, very, very rarely will I say this, but the show is actually better than the book. I wanted to throw this book across the room so many times. Ted basically confessing his crimes in third person and whispers is just so frustrating to read. So the show, for me, so much better.
And you say that rare. Very rare.
Yeah, book is always better. Love to read, but that book just sucked. It was horrible. It was nothing on the authors. It's just horrible to read. It's just so frustrating. Like, just admit what you did. Like, you're already admitting it. Just say it in first person.
Not his way. Not the Bundy way.
Nope.
He had to be in control.
Ann Roll ends The Stranger Beside Me by saying that of the women who survived Ted, they screamed, they fought, they slammed doors in a stranger's face, they ran, they doubted glib stories, they spotted flaws in these stories. They were lucky enough to have someone step up and protect them. I think that's an incredibly powerful takeaway from this story.
The true number of women that had been attacked by Ted will never be known. The following women and girls have been connected to Ted Bundy: Karen Sparks, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Elaine Rancourt,
Kathy Parks, Brenda Carol Bell, Sandy Weaver,
Denise Marie Nosland, Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith,
Laura Ann Aim, Carol Duranch,
Debbie Kent, Karen Eileen Campbell, Julie Cunningham,
Denise Lynn Oliverson, Melanie Cooley, Shelley Robertson, Lynette Dawn Culver,
Susan Curtis, Lisa Levy, Rhonda Stapley, Margaret Bowman,
Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, Cheryl Thomas,
Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, Kimberly Diane Leach.
We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!